Hi everyone, this is Casey. I wanted to share a quick reminder that enrollment is now open for the next cohort of my signature Paradigm Shift program. This is the program where I personally coach you through taking action with the essential skills and mindsets you need to support your PDA child or teen and make true progress. After every cohort, I ask parents for feedback, and what they say over and over again is that the program is life-changing. It empowered them to transform their relationship with their child and stabilize their home. You can use the link in the show notes to learn more, join the program interest list, or dive right in and enroll for immediate access. Now, on to today's show. Hi, and welcome to the At Peace Parents podcast. I'm Casey, and I'm here to empower you in your decision-making as a parent of a demand-avoidant child. My goal is to share insights that will generate aha moments and support your connection with your child. I'm a mom of two amazing little boys, one of whom is PDA, and I've worked with hundreds of parents just like you to teach them how to lead their child out of burnout and find the clarity, peace, and sense of community they need. The idea that there is a one-size-fits-all or a right versus wrong way to parent a pathologically demand-avoidant child or teen be getting in the way of you making the progress that you want to make as a parent. Okay, so this is a pattern that I've been noticing in my work with parents in the programs that we run for parents who are raising pathologically demand-avoidant children and teens. And there is this notion that has sort of carried over from general parenting spaces, which is the idea that there's a right way to do it and there's a wrong way to do it, whether that's choosing screen time limits, whether that's what you do about school, whether that's the boundaries you set in your home. Okay, so what happens when we have this idea that there's one way that's right versus wrong? We're going to be looking for standardized or homogenized information. We're going to be looking for a set of best practices that applies all the time. And we're going to feel uncomfortable with the messiness and the experimentation that parenting a PDA child requires, especially when you're learning a new paradigm. Okay, so today I want to talk about where this can, on a deeper level, be getting in the way of you making the progress that you want in your home with the PDA child or teen. So what is homogenization, right? Homogenization is just the idea that every single person is the same or every child is the same and that they should be doing things the same. So right now, what that idea is, generally, is that we need to be careful of not enabling our children. We need to make sure we're exposing them to things so they get used to it. We need to make sure they have a frustration tolerance, and we need to be setting firm boundaries. So that's like the general societal idea, right? And this was present for me when I was a young mother. I want to tell you a story about going to a very expensive psychologist with lots of doctoral research and a doctorate with my concerns about my PDA son, who I did not know was PDA at the time. Okay. So I went into her office to talk about the fact that he was around 3. He wouldn't do anything independently. So I had tried all the Montessori stuff, leaving stuff out, so he would engage with it and he would avoid everything. He was not able to play or engage. He was very passive, but constantly wanted me to be improving with toys. But when I would build things, he would destroy them. And he was increasingly picky. And he was also still using a pacifier at the age of 3.5. And when I was telling this psychologist about my problems, the pacifier was something I said in passing, right? Oh yeah, and he's still using a pacifier. And she honed in on that and was like, you are enabling him. You need to increase his frustration tolerance. You need to make sure he is exposed to not having that pacifier, etc. And I remember leaving that psychologist's office and feeling confusion and shame and like I was doing it wrong and like almost like pressure on my chest, right? So for many of you who are here with me live today, I'm sure you've had an experience like that, right? Where you are entrusting your vulnerability with a professional or an authority, and they're coming back at you and sort of being like, you need to do it different than what your intuition is telling you, right? Or not listening to your concerns in a way that's open, curious, and potentially creative, right? So feel free to, if you're listening to this as a podcast, reflect on that, pause, share with your partner. Oh yeah, remember when that happened? Okay, so that was 7 years ago. Long before I had heard of neurodiversity, PDA, I was not interested in parenting. I was not interested in learning a lot about parenting. I was a researcher. I was working in Washington, D.C., and I just wanted someone to tell me what to do. But when they finally did, something in my body was like, I don't think I'm going to take away my son's pacifier. Like, he seems to be really needing it for his oral regulation, which, again, terms I did not have. So now 7 years later, I'm supporting parents in a large program. Sometimes there's 150 families in this program, and I'm seeing the exact same patterns, okay? Where there is this idea that you are enabling your child. They need to develop frustration tolerance. You need to expose them. And if you lower demands or bring them out of school for 2 weeks or allow them not to go to the therapy session, then you are messing it up. It is irrevocable. They're not going to go back to school and you're doing it wrong. So let me give you an example just from this last cohort of a mom living in a progressive area of the United States in California with a psychiatrist who is supposedly neurodiversity affirming. Often parents come into my world when their children, their PDA children and teens, are in burnout, right? What do we know about burnout? Often our children need autonomy. They need to not be forced out of the house. We need to lower the demands on them, and they may have panic attacks if we force them to go places, or they may physically fight us in the depths of burnout. And so this mom was struggling, like many of us have in our journeys, to get the child to the therapy practice or to the psychological appointment. So what makes sense? Telehealth, right? But because of this pervasive idea that, like, at a certain level, like, okay, you can lower demands, but at a certain level, like, you're enabling your child and you need to bring them into the office, or I'm not going to give you the medication that we prescribe for your child. Okay, this is a real life example that just happened in the last cohort of the Paradigm Shift program. It's the exact same idea that there is one particular way that fits all children, whether they're anxious, neurodivergent, or neurotypical, and that is, at a certain point, you're enabling them. At a certain point, they need to be exposed. You need to develop their frustration tolerance, and you need to make it different. There's also an implicit blame that comes with the way that that's communicated. It's implying that we as parents have control, and that somehow us lowering demands or providing autonomy is what's causing the child to not be able to leave. Like, if you expose them more or push them more, then they wouldn't be unable to leave the house. Okay? So feel free to reflect on that and or drop an emoji if that has happened to you. It has certainly happened to me, that implication of like, well, your child won't leave the house because you're not making them, because you're allowing them to have autonomy, because you're not pushing it or forcing it or exposing or, quote, developing frustration tolerance for them. So this mother knew a lot about pathological demand avoidance. She had been experimenting with low demands and autonomy and all the accommodations we teach for years, right? That wasn't where she was getting stuck. It wasn't a lack of information, and it wasn't a lack of knowing the, quote, tactics of helping her child. It was that when she was doing this, she was met with an authority who was telling her she was doing it wrong. And where did that therapist get that authority? the idea that there is one way to do things. Now, what's unfortunate, and maybe an unpopular opinion, is that I see this flowing into the neurodiversity space and the PDA parenting space. Okay, this idea that there is just one way to parent a PDA child. So let's first take demand avoidance, right? We have these words. We have demand avoidance. We have nervous system activation, like when our kids go into fight or flight or freeze or shut down. And we have dysregulation, which just means like really upset, maybe crying, maybe like can't stay still. Okay. So when we think about demand avoidance, we're starting to think PDA, right? But demand avoidance and the nervous system being activated is just a symptom or an outcome of underlying things that are going on in the brain and body. And there's more than just PDA that can actually cause this. Okay. So let me give you an example. So many parents whose children are like my PDA son, who's very social, he's very outgoing, he was more externalized, more fight flight, but looked very hyperactive, like an ADHD kid. His first sort of gateway drug into the neurodiversity / neurodivergent space was a sensory processing disorder diagnosis, right? Which he has, right? He has sensory issues, but we were assuming that the root cause of him avoiding things and having dysregulation was because of his sensory experience. So what were we doing? We were buying the weighted blankets, we were getting the fidgets, I was getting the compression shirts, and we were working with an OT who's like, okay, do an obstacle course every morning so that he will regulate and have some sensory integration before you start your day with him, right? So what are we doing? We're doing all these things and it's making his dysregulation worse. Why? Because his root cause of demand avoidance was that he was perceiving threat around not having a choice around the obstacle course, and me and his father being in an authority position being like, you have to do it. So in this case, the autonomy thing is trumping or more important than the sensory. That doesn't mean he doesn't have sensory issues, okay? So we have all of these different things that can cause demand avoidance. We can have executive functioning issues if your child's ADHD. We can have anxiety, in which case, or OCD, in which case maybe the approach for that root cause is more exposure, is more developing a frustration tolerance, or in the case of OCD, pushing them through their sticky brain. But this idea that there's only one way to do things and that there's only one right approach, even in the neurodiversity space, is something we want to be careful of, right? So, for example, when families are working in our signature paradigm shift program, what we're doing is the scientific process, okay? So what we're doing is we're saying parents have tried everything, right? They've tried the ADHD stuff. They've tried the first then statements, the sticker charts, the visuals. They've tried behavioral therapies. They've tried the sensory stuff, etc. And the reason they're there is because those things haven't worked, right? Or haven't worked enough. So then we develop a hypothesis. What's the hypothesis? It's not saying this is what it is. We're just saying because nothing else has worked, let's experiment with the idea that maybe the dysregulation and maybe the demand avoidance or nervous system activation and basic needs struggles like toileting, sleep hygiene, safety, and or eating might be because of a root cause of perceiving threat around not having choice and autonomy and you being above them. Okay, so we take 3 months and then we go through a logic based on that hypothesis of okay, if it's that root cause, this is what we do, right? This is how we make decisions. These are the accommodations. This is how we track data. This is how we figure it out, right? And we're consistent with that one lens. And then what parents can do is that they can figure out, is it this or is it that? And what's happened in the general parenting and therapeutic space is that parents aren't typically given the autonomy, agency, and trust from providers to actually experiment, right? To say, okay, nothing else has worked. So can we think about this in a radically different way and take some time to try something truly different instead of shaming the parent because they're not consistent enough, or that the parent or the child must be doing something wrong because these standard practices of more compliance, exposure-oriented approaches, even in the gentle parenting space, are making things worse. So how can a parent do that when they're being shamed? Okay, in order to experiment and collect data and to learn something brand new and to shift the way that you're thinking about yourself and your child, we have to be in this part of the brain, the frontal lobe, or the most evolved part, which is where we can be creative, which is where we can connect, which is where we can take a step back and have perspective instead of just like responding to the fear that is instilled in us among authorities, parenting gurus, and I think even people who sometimes mean well. Like, I don't think that therapist that I spoke to when my son was 3.5 was a bad person. I don't think she was trying to hurt me or was malicious, but she was so conditioned with this idea of like, if you let your child have a pacifier, then he's going to turn out to be spoiled, right? Guess what? He had a pacifier until he was almost 8 and it was fine. Like, he's great. He's doing great. It was fine. So the other place I want parents to be discerning, and this is something I also see parents getting stuck with a lot in our programs, is this homogenization or this idea of right and wrong parenting in the PDA space. Okay? So where does this come up the most? This comes up around decisions that parents are making, decisions around screens, decisions around school, decisions around siblings, decisions around how and when they tell their child about a diagnosis, whether or not they continue their ABA therapy, etc. One of the things that I'm super strict about in my spaces is judgment of another person for their decisions. So what this means is that sometimes it is the right decision to have a screen time limit. It does not mean you're not neurodiversity affirming. It also sometimes is the right decision to keep your kid in school, depending on what your situation is. Okay. So let me give you an example of like this question of screens. And I know that like, I remember how I felt when I was first learning about my son and his struggles. I literally would have paid anything to have someone just be like, do this, say this, send him to this place, and this person is going to fix it for you. I would have paid anything. I just wanted someone to solve it for me. I wanted to pay an expert. I wanted to have this rules and like, do this, say this. This is the solution. It's not that complicated. He'll go to therapy 10 hours a week. He'll be good. So I understand why parents come into my programs and want me to be like, you should definitely have screen time limits, or you shouldn't have screen time limits. But I'm never going to do that. Why? Because your unique child and your situation is unique. Okay, let me give you an example of a family. I spot coached a family, a parent who has 4 children, all neurodivergent. She herself was neurodivergent, and she was exploring the topic of screens. So often we come to these topics wanting a solution, right? From, an app or a parenting guru or an expert. It's what I wanted to. But what we do in the program is I step back and we use a methodology to help her explore what's right for her family, okay? So the first thing we do is we look at the constraints when we're exploring screens. What are the constraints in your family? Do you have 1 child or do you have 4? Do you have another caregiver, or are you a single parent without financial support? Are you in burnout? Do you have chronic illness? If so, the costs and benefits of screens are going to be different than a parent who has 1 child who who's not actually in burnout, who has a spouse and has parents living nearby who are supportive of their PDA child. So right off the bat, we're outlining the unique constraints to this parent. So this parent had 4 kids. The dad was full-time working and she was home with the 4 kids. And all 4 of them were PDA. So as we worked through, okay, what are the constraints? What's the actual problem? Can we reframe it as a decision? And what do you have control over as a parent, right? Not focusing on like, can I make my child not watch a screen or turn it off when I tell them to, but rather, what can you do, parent? Okay, you can let all 4 use screens. You can let 3 use screens. You can let 2 use screens. You can have a projector that you put up and they all watch the same thing. You can have nobody use screens. You can turn off the Wi-Fi at a certain time. We can get iPads and have separate spaces. Like, we're coming at it from a neutral perspective. Screens are neutral. I'm neutral. And we're coming at it from like, here are all the things that are under your control. And here are your constraints. Okay, let's pick 2 possibilities and let's explore them through a nervous system lens. Okay, what if we do option A? Everybody has an iPad. And option 2, nobody has an iPad. And then we're looking at the costs and benefits, not just to the PDA child, but also for the mom, for the siblings, and we're going through that. And then what we're seeing is that we get to make a decision. So this parent at that point in the program decided, I'm just going to not have screens, right? This is a PDA parent with 4 PDA children. Okay. And what we see sometimes is people shouting at you because, oh, you're not neurodiversity affirming because they need all the screen time to get out of burnout. There is not one way. So she makes this decision. And when I'm in that with that person, I don't know what they're going to do. I'm not guiding them to like, they should do this or they should do this. I'm providing that facilitation and coaching with the methodology to be like, okay, I'm coming at it neutrally with non-judgment. And we have this structure of the method. And then you get to see clearly and make your decision. And what's that doing? It's turning back to your own autonomy and agency when you feel like a total victim of circumstance. Then what happens? 6 months later, this parent makes a different decision and now has free range to screens in her home. And it's working really well. Okay. And she might decide something different 6 months from now. And that's okay too. Why? Because again, it's not static. What we're doing here as parents. It's not something that you can plug into an AI powered app and be like, what do I do when, right? Because the parenting guru or the set of rules or the AI powered app or the book doesn't know that you're under strain with your husband, that maybe he's undiagnosed PDA and figuring it out, that your child masks in front of him, and that you've had a fawn response from childhood. It's all going to make a difference to what you do in these situations. So when we have this idea that there's just one way to do it, and there's one expert, or there's a set of experts, or there's a guru, or a book, or a right way, it's negating the fluidity of what we're doing as parents. Okay, so things will change in your family. They will change over the next 3 months. They will change over the next year, and they will change continually because you change and your child changes. Okay, so let me give you an example of 2 ways that this fluidity comes into play, for example, with boundaries with a PDA child. So often we hear, and I think in almost every parenting space, except perhaps the PDA space, this is a hard and fast rule, which is you can be kind and you can be gentle, but you need to have firm and consistent boundaries, right? Feel free to drop an emoji, share with me, or drop a comment if you've heard that. Or if somehow the conditioning around that has made you get stuck, because I see parents get stuck with this a lot. And I get stuck with it too. Like when I shift a boundary in real time, I'm thinking to myself, oh, you're teaching him that you're inconsistent, or you're teaching him that he's unsafe because there's not a boundary there. But with our unique children, with PDA children, for example, they have a fluctuating nervous system disability. And one of the actual features of how their nervous system works is that accumulation of stress, not just over a day when people say like after school restraint collapse or whatever, or like, oh yeah, their kettle blew at the end of the day. We're talking months and sometimes years of it building in the system and then having a tipping point into burnout, or sometimes what looks like an autistic regression, right? And this can happen over the course of a week, where like by the end of the school week or the end of a semester, your child has gone almost past their threshold and like they can't engage, their basic needs are getting worse, and then you need to reset. We don't always know where that accumulation is, right? So sometimes we might have a boundary that works most days, but we don't know our child is about to tip over into panic, right? Where setting the boundary becomes absolutely not worth it for them to go into a panic response where they can't connect, empathize, learn, or access basic needs, right? So I remember spot coaching a family who was living in Spain. And there's all these little like stores with candy when they would walk around. And the parents were concerned about the amount of sugar that the child was eating and demanding every time they walked by a different store. So if we're looking at this in a quote homogenized way, in the PDA space, it's like, okay, we got to give the kid autonomy and we need to lower demands. So whenever they ask for sugar, we give it to them, right? Which is a very superficial way of looking at things. She had more of a boundary most of the time around the eating of the sugar. But because they were on vacation, even though they were having fun, there was more nervous system activation building. And so she was like, what do I do when my child is having an enormous meltdown because I'm setting a boundary around this one candy at the end of the day? Like we've already gone to 3 stores. And what a parent wants me to say is, you should do this. But I don't do that. Okay. So we explore through a cost benefit lens where your child is in burnout, recovery, and equilibrium. We understand how long you've been parenting this way. We understand where their threshold is that day, and then the cost and benefit in that moment. So like you might most of the time be like, you know what? We're not going to go get that 5th piece of candy, right? But if you have outlying stressors of a difficult week, right? And you're on vacation and the child is tipping past their threshold to the point where they're going to be violent against their siblings and not sleep that night in the hotel, it's totally fine to make a different boundary decision, right? Like it doesn't have to be consistent. It doesn't have to be like, okay, we made this rule and now it's always the same, right? The same thing with our children over the course of years, right? Like the way that I engaged with boundaries and screens and siblings when my son was deep in burnout, violent, and it was over 5 years ago is very different than what I do now. And that it depends, right? So like even in the PDA space of like, what should I do? The answer has to come from within you. It has to come from an awareness of your relationship, where you are in the burnout cycle, where your child's threshold of tolerance is, how it's impacting basic needs and other things like nervous system activation, which we can teach you how to track, and make decisions that are aligned for your family. Okay, so like for 5 years, I've been delivering my child his food while he watches an iPad because he needs that cup to be filled so he can access school. But lately, because I know his nervous system activation has come down more, I will say, hey, bud, can you get your own cup of water? I would never have said that 5 years ago. Does it mean what I'm doing now is wrong? No, it just means things have changed, right? And we're evolving. And my younger son, I'm doing things differently with him now too, right? So it's a matter of understanding how to make decisions, how to tune into your intuition, how to track data and experiment in a way that allows you to trust that intuition, and to experiment with tools, not this dogma or parenting philosophy that's the right way to do things, right? Finally, I think that parents, myself included, feel extraordinarily uncomfortable in the messiness of getting a child out of burnout and experimenting with a new way, right? So feel free to reflect on this in the podcast if this is true for you. But when we first truly start parenting in a different way, it's clunky, it's awkward. Our kids respond in ways that feel scary. Like I remember, lowering demands and trying to provide more autonomy and trying to figure out, but where are my boundaries? Like I still need to get sleep and I still need to have him in his room because I had pretty severe mental health issues after my second baby was born. And I worked with a specialist, a psychologist and a psychiatrist, postpartum specialist. And one of the main things that they said to me and that we worked on was like, you have to get sleep or else it impacts your mental health in a way that will impact the whole family, right? So it was kind of a non-negotiable for my family. But my son sensed that we were changing the way we were doing things. And like any other kid, was testing the new status quo of like, oh, mom's going to be flexible. Mom's going to give me autonomy. Mom's going to deliver me stuff. And he would keep coming in and out of his room, coming down. And it was super scary. Like, I was like, I don't know what to do. Do I set a boundary? Do I not? Am I doing it wrong? Our kids start to unmask, and especially if they've had a mask on and we're helping them get out of burnout, the behavior can look worse, right? We doubt ourselves because we've never parented this way, and it's just a messy endeavor, okay? And that is not reflected in parenting books or gurus or, these platitudes about how to do it right. So at the end of the day, parenting is about connection and unconditional love. It's not about making your child into something different. It's not about training them to be different. And when this is about connection and unconditional love, it's a human endeavor, and we are messy. We're complicated. We're all different. We've got our own issues. We're imperfect. And that's totally okay. It's just in this space where so many things are tending towards homogenization of this is the right way. I want parents to remember that there isn't a one size fits all. Even in the PDA parenting space, it's okay to make different decisions than you did a year ago. It's also okay to make different decisions than you did compared to another person in a PDA support group, and allowing it to be messy and feeling uncomfortable as you learn how to do things. Doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It just means you're figuring it out because you're tuning to another human. You're feeling what's inside your body. You're learning to trust your intuition again. And yes, for example, in our program, we will provide you the tools and the structure and the support to do that. But ultimately, you're going to be coming back to self, not looking externally for what's the right thing to do according to this expert. All right, my friends, it was good being with you all. It was nice to see you, and I'll see you again soon. Okay, bye. Thanks everyone for being here with me at the At Peace Parents podcast. This is your source for all things related to understanding, supporting, accommodating, and advocating for your PDA child. To go deeper on any of these topics, check out my course offerings and masterclasses at the website www.atpeaceparents.com. To completely transform the way you think about and relate to your child and to bring peace and stability to your home, join us for the next cohort of the Paradigm Shift program.